Dwayne Johnson's driver quietly concealed a heartbreaking reality, living in his car. What The Rock did next left the world in complete awe and deeply inspired many. The sun had just begun to set over the bustling city, casting a warm, orange glow against the tall skyscrapers. Dwayne Johnson, in the midst of a whirlwind press tour for his latest blockbuster, leaned back in the plush seat of a sleek black SUV. The car navigated through the dense evening traffic, and it had been a long day filled with interviews, photo sessions, and public appearances. Dwayne was known for his endless energy and his down-to-earth, approachable nature. But tonight, something felt off different. Mark, his driver, a quiet man in his mid-40s, kept his gaze fixed firmly on the road. He wasn't one for small talk, and Dwayne noticed the faint dark circles under his eyes. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly. The car was warm, but Mark still wore his worn-out jacket, zipped all the way up, as if the chill from outside clung to him. Dwayne, always attuned to the emotions of those around him, felt an unsettling sense of concern. He had seen that exhaustion before, the kind that wasn't merely physical but seemed to weigh down a person's entire spirit. "Long day, huh?" Dwayne asked, breaking the silence. Mark glanced briefly at him through the rearview mirror, offering a small, forced smile. "Yeah, but it's work. Gotta keep moving," Mark replied, his tone polite, yet distant. Dwayne, however, noticed the heaviness in his words, the silent burden they carried. It was as though Mark was hiding something deeper, something untold. But Dwayne didn't press him right away. His curiosity was piqued, but he let it go for the moment. As they neared the event venue, Dwayne glanced back at Mark, feeling a strange intuition that this ride, this night, was unlike any other. As the SUV came to a stop outside the brightly lit venue, Dwayne saw Mark quickly turn off the engine and grab a thin blanket from the back seat. He wrapped it around himself as if to shield against the cold evening air. Dwayne hesitated for a moment, watching as Mark leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed on the street ahead. There was something about the scene, the blanket, the way Mark's shoulders slumped as if carrying an unbearable weight, that gnawed at him. Dwayne entered the venue, his usual charisma on full display for the cameras and the crowd of eager fans. He shook hands, posed for pictures, but his mind kept drifting back to Mark, sitting in the car alone. Something in Mark's demeanor, the quiet struggle in his eyes, was too heavy to ignore. It wasn't just about a driver having a tough day, it was something far more profound. After the event, Dwayne returned to the car, his thoughts still unsettled. Mark immediately straightened up in his seat, trying to hide the blanket. Dwayne climbed into the back seat and casually asked, "You okay, man?" Mark hesitated, but gave a small nod. "Yeah, just a bit of a chilly night," he said, forcing a smile. But Dwayne wasn't convinced. The silence between them felt thicker than ever. As they drove through the night, Dwayne couldn't shake the sense that Mark was keeping something from him, a story buried deep within his quiet demeanor. The ride back to the hotel was unusually still, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Dwayne observed Mark, noticing the tired lines etched deeply into his face. The thin blanket was still folded neatly in the back of the car, but it stayed on Dwayne's mind. There was something about Mark's silence, something about his quiet resilience that felt especially heavy tonight. Finally, Dwayne leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and broke the silence. "Mark, can I ask you some things?" Mark glanced up in the rearview mirror, his polite expression still intact. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. Call me Dwayne," Dwayne said with a small grin. "You've been driving me around for a few days now, and I've got to ask, are you really okay? You seem, I don't know, worn out." Mark paused for a moment. His grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly, and for a fleeting second, it seemed like he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, his shoulders sinking as if releasing a weight he had been carrying for far too long. "It's been a rough year," Mark said quietly, his voice steady but laced with sadness. "Lost my wife to cancer about 9 months ago. Medical bills wiped out our savings, and now I'm just trying to keep things together for my daughter. She's staying with relatives for now, while I try to get back on my feet." Dwayne sat back, absorbing the weight of Mark's words. He remained silent, giving Mark the space to continue. "I've been sleeping in my car to save money," Mark added, his tone matter-of-fact. "It's not ideal, but it's temporary. At least I've got a job. A lot of people in my situation don't even have that." Dwayne's chest tightened. There was no self-pity in Mark's voice, only a quiet resilience that struck Dwayne deeply. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Dwayne asked softly. Mark shrugged, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. "I didn't want to be a burden. Everyone's got their own struggles, right?" Dwayne nodded, feeling a deep pang of guilt. Here he was, surrounded by luxury, opportunities, and privilege, while Mark was quietly battling his own demons, struggling to survive without ever asking for help. Dwayne couldn't help but feel a profound sense of admiration for Mark's strength, but also an overwhelming need to do something. As the car pulled up to the hotel, Dwayne made a decision. He wasn't sure what he would do yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just let this go. Later that night, in his hotel room, Dwayne stared out at the city lights, his mind replaying Mark's words. The image of Mark sitting in his car, wrapped in that thin blanket, kept repeating itself. It wasn't just the hardship Mark had faced, it was his quiet dignity, his refusal to complain, and his relentless determination to keep moving forward despite the odds. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Dwayne couldn't shake the thought of how many people like Mark were out there, silently struggling, fighting battles no one knew about. The feeling was undeniable. Dwayne knew he had to do something. This wasn't about a simple, kind gesture. It was about genuinely transforming someone's life. The next morning, Dwayne began making calls. He wanted to dig deeper into Mark's situation. He reached out to the car service company and spoke to the manager, expressing his concerns. What the manager shared only amplified Dwayne's respect for Mark. The manager told him how Mark had once owned a small but successful repair shop. Before his wife fell ill, Mark had been thriving in his business. But when his wife got sick, Mark sold everything he had to pay for her treatments. Despite the struggles, he never once asked for help, even when times got tough. Listening to this, Dwayne felt a wave of both admiration and sorrow. He realized that simply offering Mark a quick fix wouldn't be enough. It had to be something far more meaningful, something that would provide Mark with long-term stability and the hope he so desperately deserved. By the time Dwayne headed out for his morning commitments, his plan was already taking shape. He was determined to approach Mark with humility and respect, ensuring that his offer of help didn't come across as charity, but rather as a partnership, something mutual. Later that day, when Dwayne climbed into the car and saw Mark's weary but warm smile, Dwayne knew this would be a moment neither of them would forget. He was ready to take action. Dwayne chose to approach Mark in a way that wouldn't overwhelm him. After their usual ride the following day, Dwayne invited Mark to join him for lunch. Mark hesitated at first, clearly unused to such requests from clients. But Dwayne's insistence, combined with his friendly demeanor, made it hard for Mark to say no. "I just want to hear more about your story," Dwayne said casually. "You seem like someone with a lot of wisdom." At the restaurant, Mark was visibly uncomfortable at first. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but Dwayne had a special way of making people feel at ease. They began talking, and Dwayne asked Mark about his life before everything got difficult. Slowly, Mark began to open up. He spoke about the joy he had found in running his small repair shop, the deep love he had for his late wife, and the hopes and dreams he still held for his teenage daughter. "She's the reason I keep going," Mark said with a faint, bittersweet smile. "I just want her to have a better life than I did." As Mark shared more, Dwayne listened intently, nodding, asking thoughtful questions. What struck Dwayne the most was Mark's humility. Despite everything, he wasn't bitter about his situation, and he didn't blame anyone for his hardships. "I've had my fair share of bad days," Mark admitted, "but you can't dwell on them. You just have to keep moving forward." Dwayne couldn't help but admire the resilience behind those words. By the time lunch ended, Dwayne's plan had solidified in his mind. He didn't just want to help Mark patch things up temporarily. He wanted to help him rebuild, to give him the tools he needed to stand on his own again. Dwayne didn't just want to provide financial assistance. He wanted to offer Mark the opportunity to start over, a chance to reclaim his life. With this in mind, Dwayne told Mark he had a surprise for him, but kept the details vague. "You've inspired me," he said sincerely. "And I think it's time someone reminded you of just how much you're capable of." Mark looked puzzled, but he nodded, clearly touched by Dwayne's words. Dwayne smiled to himself, knowing that the next step would be one of the most rewarding things he'd ever done. A few days later, Dwayne asked Mark to meet him after his shift. "I want to show you something," he said with a grin. Mark, unsure of what was happening, nodded hesitantly. As they drove, Dwayne kept the conversation light, steering it away from anything that might give away what was about to unfold. They pulled into a modest but well-kept apartment complex. Mark glanced around, clearly confused. "Why are we here?" he asked. Dwayne simply smiled and gestured for Mark to follow him. They climbed the stairs to a second-floor unit, where Dwayne pulled out a key and unlocked the door. The apartment was cozy, fully furnished, and filled with warm lighting. Comfortable furniture dotted the space, and a small kitchen was stocked with basic groceries. Mark stepped inside, looking around in disbelief. This is nice," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. He turned to Dwayne, still trying to figure out what was going on. "It's yours," Dwayne said simply. "I've rented this place for you and your daughter for a year. You don't have to live in your car anymore." Mark froze, his eyes wide in shock. "What?" "No, Dwayne, I can't accept this. This is too much," he stammered, his voice trembling with emotion. Dwayne stepped forward, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You can and you will," he said firmly but with warmth. "You've done everything you could to stay strong, to keep moving forward for your daughter. It's time someone had your back. This is a fresh start, Mark. You deserve this." Mark's shoulders trembled as he fought back tears. "I don't even know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Dwayne replied, a soft smile on his face. But that wasn't all. He handed Mark an envelope, inside of which was a list of resources Dwayne had arranged. It included contact information for a financial advisor, job leads, and even a connection to a local repair shop owner who was willing to help Mark rebuild his business. Mark stared at the paper, his hands shaking. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I wanted to," Dwayne replied. "And I want you to know this isn't just about giving you something. It's about reminding you that you're not alone. People care, Mark." "I care." Mark's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. When he finally found his voice, all he could manage to say was, "Thank you." But the weight of those two words spoke volumes. Dwayne smiled and gave him a nod, knowing that this was just the beginning of Mark's journey back to hope. A few days after Mark moved into the apartment, an unexpected ripple began to spread. Unbeknownst to Dwayne, someone at the restaurant where he had taken Mark to lunch had overheard their conversation and recorded part of it. The clip, which showed Dwayne listening intently to Mark's story, followed by the moment he handed over the keys to the apartment, was shared online with the caption, "The Rock just changed someone's life." The video went viral almost overnight, touching millions of people around the world. Social media exploded with praise for Dwayne's act of kindness. But more importantly, the story of Mark's resilience resonated deeply with countless viewers. Comments flooded in from people sharing their own struggles, stories of hope, and gratitude for the reminder that humanity still had its heroes. Mark, initially overwhelmed by the sudden attention, found himself receiving messages of encouragement from strangers. Some offered to help, sending a new toolbox for his repair business, offering advice, and even making donations to help him get back on his feet. But what touched Mark the most were the messages from others who shared how his story had inspired them.